The defending NFC East champions have a new quarterback this season. Ryan Fitzpatrick looking to bring the magic to the nation's capital. Washington with an emerging defense, hoping for some stabilization at that quarterback position following a season where 4 different players started under center. Fitzpatrick helped put the Dolphins in playoff position last season before being pulled for Tua Tagovailoa. 2 seasons in Miami, went 9-11 overall. Can put up numbers, can get some wins. Have an opportunity this season. Might be the best defense he's played with in quite some time for the journeyman with the long beard. Let's bring in our draft analyst, Ryan Wilson, to go inside the Washington war room. And let's start at the quarterback position. Fitzpatrick presumed the starter, but we know how much they like Taylor Heinicke, who had that really good playoff start against the Bucs. What are the chances Heinicke at some point takes over the starting job this season?
Well, never say never with Ryan Fitzpatrick. That's the thing with him, Chris, that he can give you 4 or 5 really good games, almost Hall of Fame level games, and then he can give you some real stinkers that make you question why he should be out there. Ironically, that never happened last season when he was benched for Tua Tagovailoa, and you could argue that perhaps Ryan Fitzpatrick should have stayed in the starting role and the Dolphins might have made the playoffs. But Heinicke had that stretch late last season, helped the football team get to the playoffs, played really well in the postseason, and parlayed that into a new contract this offseason. But I think what Washington feels is what we're seeing with our eyes. That while they like Heinicke as a backup, as a young developmental project, Ryan Fitzpatrick is the guy you go to now, and you stick with him until the wheels fall off. And hopefully, fingers crossed, in this division, which isn't very good, the wheels don't fall off. Maybe you lose 1 tire, you keep 3 on there, and Ryan Fitzpatrick in the NFC East can make that work. But when he's clicking on all cylinders, to keep the car metaphors going, he can be lights out and create a lot of problems for opposing defenses. And again, I'll reiterate it. This division is not very good. So Ryan Fitzpatrick feels like the perfect fit as a bridge quarterback to whomever ends up being your franchise future, whether that's Taylor Heinicke in a year or 2, or whether it's a matter of going out and finding that young quarterback who isn't yet on the roster.
Well, they did go out and they got him a weapon in wide receiver Curtis Samuel on the free agent market. What did you make of what they did as a whole in free agency?
You know, so we talked about the Eagles not doing a whole lot because they were unable to because of the salary cap situation. The football team did exactly the opposite. And historically, 15 years ago or so, we would always make fun of Dan Snyder for spending a ton of money on over-the-hill stars, paying them exorbitant salaries in free agency, and then watching that team win 4 or 5 football games. This feels different. You mentioned Curtis Samuel. He helps Terry McLaurin, takes the pressure off him. They also signed Adam Humphries. That also gives you a presence in the slot. They're building that wide receiver core that wasn't great last year out of Terry McLaurin, creating more weapons for Ryan Fitzpatrick. So I love the direction they're going. They re-signed Scherf, who they had to along the offensive line. On the defensive side, they got William Jackson to make that secondary even better. And again, it doesn't feel like the Washington teams of old where they're just signing old-timers who have star value and then not filling out the rest of the roster. This feels like a concerted effort to make this team better from top to bottom, and I think that's going to serve them well once we get around to the 2021 season.
Went out and got a couple of wide receivers in free agency, as you mentioned. They got Ryan Fitzpatrick, quarterback in free agency. They re-signed Taylor Heinicke in free agency, but yet quarterback and wide receiver position still at the forefront in your mind heading into the draft. Why?
So Ryan Fitzpatrick is almost 40 years old, and again, we don't know what we have in Taylor Heinicke over the long term. So if you're sitting at 19 and there's not going to be a top 5 quarterback there, those guys will be long gone. What are you going to do if one of these quarterbacks, whether it's Trey Lance or Justin Fields or Mac Jones or whomever, falls to 9, 10, 11? Are you going to be in the quarterback market? I think that's something to keep an eye on with Washington, because if they truly love one of these quarterbacks, and we've heard Trey Lance's name mentioned as a possibility. Pete Briscoe talked about on yesterday's show that he's heard that they don't quite love him as much as maybe some people think, but just something to watch, because it only takes one team, and if Washington is that team, they should go get it. Now, if they decide to stay put, they could certainly circle back in round 2 and find a quarterback there, and that's what I had them doing in my 7-round mock draft. So there's a lot of versatility in terms of the positions they can target, whether quarterback or wide receiver, either in rounds 1 or round 2 or even later in the draft.
So if they stay at 19, what will their options be?
So this is sort of interesting. Their defense is out of this world, one of the best defenses in the NFL. Still, there's a hole at linebacker. So I have them targeting linebacker. Zaven Collins out of Tulsa. He can play off ball. He can play apex defender. He can play on the edge. So he creates a lot of versatility in the middle of that defense to go along with everything they have in the front with Chase Young, and obviously the secondary now with William Jackson and the members of that secondary that are currently there. I like the idea of Zaven Collins here. You could certainly go in another direction if you wanted to with a wide receiver or perhaps a quarterback that we talked about, but I think Zaven Collins makes this defense that much better, and it takes the pressure off whoever the quarterback is. Ryan Fitzpatrick, Taylor Heineke, quarterback number 3 that we don't know who that is yet, because we've seen it happen year in and year out over the last 15, 20, 30 years. If you have a really good defense, it makes up for a lot of mistakes that your offense might make as the quarterback learns on the job. With Ryan Fitzpatrick, that won't be a concern. We talked about the offensive weapons they've added, so I think this taken together, Washington feels like my favorite right now, and it sounds sort of crazy to say in a division with Dak Prescott being healthy, but Washington's my favorite right now atop that division.
If it only takes 7 wins to win a division, Washington probably is that team. They showed us they could do that last season. Trey Lance is the quarterback you have them trading up for if they're in the market for a potential franchise quarterback. But you still have them potentially going after one in the later rounds. Who's a quarterback that they could target on day 2?
So my quarterback 6 is Kellen Mond, and he is one of my favorite players in this draft class that I don't feel we're talking enough about. 4-year starter at Texas A&M. He had 44 starts. He's gotten better each and every year. He could be there in round 2 at pick 51 for Washington, and I love the idea of him coming in there and sitting behind Ryan Fitzpatrick for a year or maybe just a few months, depending on how things go. But I think he's sneakily going to be a really good football player. Then Jabril Cox. We talked about Zaven Collins. If you go in another direction in round 1, Jabril Cox could be there in round 2 as a linebacker type. Transfer from North Dakota State where he played with Trey Lance, and then he went to LSU where he had a really good season last year. So I think that's also an option if you're looking there. And finally, I mentioned Terrace Marshall, the wide receiver out of LSU. Really good 2019 season. Opted out early in 2020. Deep threat, big catch radius guy. Really good pro day when he ran a sub 4.4. One more weapon for whoever the quarterback ends up being long-term there in Washington.
So when you look at the division, Cowboys the favorite because Dak Prescott is coming back. Washington is there at plus 300, 3-1 to win the division. Is that your pick right now?
Yeah. To quote Will Brinson, I'm banging the plus 300. I feel like what they've done this offseason, based on how they played at the end of last season, based on Ron Rivera giving that team some direction, and the fact that Ryan Fitzpatrick can hold down the fort for a season if you need him to, and if they solve the quarterback situation either in round 1 or later in the later rounds with someone like Kellen Mond, that team is going in the right direction. Dallas has to figure out a whole bunch of things on defense. I don't know if they have enough draft picks to do it. They didn't solve all the issues on defense and free agency, so that's where my concern lies. Dak Prescott's a fantastic player, but can he put up 35 points a game if your defense is as sorry as it was last year? That's the concern. That's why I like Washington a little better right now.
Washington 3-1 to win the NFC East right now. That's Ryan Wilson's pick. Ryan, thank you so much. Let's take a look at some other odds for Washington this season. To make the playoffs, plus 170. Obviously, winning the NFC East would get them there, but they're right there at that 8-win total. Last season only won 7 games. That was enough to win the division. 8 might be enough to win it this season, depending on how the Cowboys do with Dak Prescott coming back. And Ryan has a lot of concerns about that Cowboys D. You can hear Ryan and a cast of what seems like dozens on the Pick 6 podcast hosted by Will Brinson. The latest episode breaking down a very strong offensive line class in the draft and very weak defensive tackle class. Chris Trapasso joins the pod.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.